listening to Inclusive AF with Jackye Clayton and Katie Van Horn.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Inclusive AF podcast. I am Jackye Clayton, and Katie is probably somewhere gallivanting in Mexico right now, which is great. I never get to do it all by myself. This is a thrilling time because, and y'all know, Katie talks all the time. So now I get an opportunity to talk. And today we have special guest Michelle Rhee. So Michelle, why don't you tell all of our audience about you?
Sure. So my name is Michelle Rhee. I'm one of the co-founders of a new company called BuildWithin. A little bit about me. I actually spent most of my career in K-12 education, including being the Chancellor of the Washington, D.C. Public Schools District. But more recently have moved into the workforce development and future of workspace. And in particular, BuildWithin is a company that has a software platform that makes it easier for employers to start and manage apprenticeship programs.
Ooh, I love that. Apprenticeship. So tell everyone, how does apprenticeship differ from internship, differ from returnships? How does all of that get in there?
Yes. So it's funny because my co-founder, Jimena, when she came to me initially with this idea and she was like, apprenticeships are going to be the wave of the future, all I could think of was like glass blowers and blacksmiths,
yes.
right?
Yes.
So a lot of people, when they hear the term apprenticeships, they think of like super old school model, right? But the notion of an apprenticeship generally is the idea that you are learning while you're doing. So you're learning on the job, right? And so back in the olden days, it was like the newbie looking over the shoulder of the master artisan learning the craft, right? And it was very much this kind of one-to-one relationship. And I think in this country, apprenticeships have been effectively utilized by folks in trades and construction. So electricians, plumbers, HVAC folks, right? And what we're really focused on is how can we take this model, this like sort of learning on the job model, and apply it more broadly across sectors and industries? Because the reality is, like, we have more than 11 million jobs every year in this country that go unfilled because employers are saying we can't find the skilled workforce that we need to fill these roles.
Yes.
But at the same time, we have almost 10 million un- and underemployed people, many of whom would love to move into those jobs, but they don't feel like they have the access, the know-how, right, the skills to do that. And so for those job seekers, the idea that like I could move into a tech job or something in like renewable energy or healthcare, it seems out of reach, right? Because they're like, I don't know how to do that job. And in order to learn that, I would have to go back to school for, get an undergrad degree or a master's, or at the very least, like attend a 3 to 4 month boot camp, right?
Right.
Most job seekers cannot afford to have that kind of gap in income. Like I got to pay my rent next week, right?
Yeah.
And so an apprenticeship program is one in which the job seeker moves into a role and they have a full-time job with pay and benefits from day one. And then the idea is that over the course of a year, sometimes 2 or 3, they are learning how to do that job effectively, but it's while they're getting paid. And so it's a great model for the job seeker. But at the same time, like it's equally beneficial to the employer because one, you're accessing a super diverse group of candidates, right? So of the job seekers that we have in our database, like 90% of them are people of color, 40% women. We have neuro-diverse folks, veterans, like people returning to the workforce after childbirth or incarceration. We have seniors, like you name it, it's super diverse. 2, most employers don't know this, but there are a bevy of incentives that exist for employers who start apprenticeship programs and hire apprentices. And that's everything from like wage reimbursements to tax breaks to like training and equipment stipends. And then the last and probably most compelling piece is the fact that apprentices stay with their employers. So the best apprenticeship programs in this country have a 5-year retention rate of 95%.
Wow.
They're super loyal, right? They're like, hey, this company believed in me when nobody else did. They invested in my professional development. And so they tend to stay. And if you look at like nowadays with just the churn that so many employers,
Yes.
every 12 to 18 months, they're like just, it's a revolving door. The thought of having a source of candidates who are going to come, they're going to learn, they're going to stay. It's super compelling to employers.
Dude, I mean, yes. And I'm thinking right now, so I run TA and DEIB for Textio. I'm looking for a new diversity program manager. And I require that someone has 2 years of experience because there's a lot within the diversity playbook. And it's like, if you haven't done it on a corporate side or understand the business initiatives, you're going to get your feelings hurt in that first year. Or people will say, I want to learn from you. And I'm like, I don't know how I can do that and push this program forward. Like, this is how these things and get into that. But not only would they be getting the skills, you're also showing how it works within your company instead of taking any of the bad habits that come with you from other organizations, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it's interesting because when you explain the apprenticeship model to people, everyone's bought in. This is one of the interesting things about apprenticeships. Like Republicans love them, Democrats love them, unions, corporations, like broad-based support for apprenticeships. So the question is, if everybody loves apprenticeships, why isn't it the case that like every company in this country has an apprenticeship program, right? And when we talk to employers about, well, like what's the hesitation? It comes down to 2 main things. So the first is it's really hard to get an apprenticeship program like up and running, right? So you have to develop standards and curricula and work processes and have an LEA partner and all this kind of stuff. So that's one of the things, which at BuildWithin, we like take that off the table. We're a national program sponsor approved by the Department of Labor. So like we can work with any employer anywhere. But the other thing is exactly what you just referred to. So even if you have like the CEO and the HR head who's like, yes, we want to do this, where you get pushback is from the line managers, right? But these are the folks who are going to have to oversee the apprentice. And they're like, really? You want to saddle me with somebody who doesn't know what they're doing and that I got to teach them how to do it and where am I going to find all the stuff? And they're like, it just sounds like more work for me. So no, thank you, right? So we've built the platform in such a way where it makes it easy for a manager to oversee the journey of an apprentice. Like everything they could possibly need is right there at their fingertips. And they have all this functionality in the platform that essentially makes it so that you're turning this person from a burden into a value add on the team super quickly, and you're accelerating their productivity.
Wow. See, I think about that. My husband was a stay-at-home dad. And so the resources were really limited when it was time to go back to work. It's like, where do I go? I don't have a lot of tenureship or just one skill set. And very capable, likes to do various things, has worked as an engineer, has worked as a project manager, and there's a lot of people there. And you see a lot of things for moms, not a lot of things for dads. Yeah. And that's the other untapped market. And you're seeing that more of stay-at-home dads that are looking to go back to the workforce. But now is also the time. In the last year, we were talking a couple years ago in the talent acquisition space. Recruiters were getting, grossly overpaid, and they were becoming scarce. There was a point where they were looking for more recruiters than they were for engineers. Now you've seen several layoffs. And at this stage, a lot of people are like, I need to look for the next career. I've been out of work for close to a year. I need to make that shift. And so if somebody wants to be an apprentice, do they, within the BuildWithin platform, choose where they want to go, or do you give them a test? How does that part work?
Yeah. So the first thing is that there are assessments that the apprentice or the apprentice candidate can take. And what we know based on the research is that the vast majority of Americans think that they are bad test takers. So we don't want to turn this into like a stress-inducing experience, try to keep it like relatively quick and easy. But essentially what the assessments do is it gives the person a really good sense of like, here are your strengths, right? And based on those strengths, here are some of the careers that you can consider and or should consider, right? And then they have the opportunity to, through our career exploration website or what we call Explore, they can like actually watch videos of people who are in those roles right now so that they can understand, not just like looking at a job description, because there's only so much you can glean from that, right? You want to hear from somebody who's doing that job right now, like, what does my day-to-day look like? What are the best and worst things about being in this job, right? So they can sort of watch those videos and then based on that, look for opportunities for apprenticeships, like, and we've got them sort of across the country. But a lot, as you know, like so many jobs now are virtual, right? So you could be in Dallas or in LA where I am and working for a company that's in Chattanooga or Sacramento or, Baltimore. So there are so many opportunities to move into an apprenticeship virtually and across a wide range of jobs.
Well, now I have to ask the question. Okay, so you went to Cornell,
Yes.
You went to Harvard, and now you're like, oh yeah, degree. When you made huge investments into getting your degree, right?
I mean, so here's the thing. I'll tell you this quick story. My husband and I, about a year ago, we moved into this like fancy apartment building in downtown Los Angeles. And when we moved in, we were like, who are our neighbors? Like we kept being in the elevator with all these 20-somethings. And my husband was like, what do these young people do? Like we can barely afford this place. And I used to play in the NBA. So like, how are these young people affording this place? And so he like went on a mission to like, every time he was in the elevator, he'd ask the person like, hey, what do you do for a living? Our neighbors are content creators, they are in cannabis, they are in crypto, gaming, like all of these things that honestly, they did not go to college to get a degree to do this. They are making great money. Probably their parents, when they said they were going to do this, were like, what? Can you make a living off of this, right? So the world is just changing. And there are, if you look at sort of the economy and the future of work, there are going to be more and more jobs that there are not specific like degree paths that are tied to these jobs, right? So for example, one of the things that we've been obsessed about at BuildWithin is the electrification space, right? Electric charging stations. Across the country, on any given day, 30% of electric charging stations are down, right? And that's because they don't have enough service technicians to go out and kind of do what they need to do. This is not a job where like there's a whole bunch of training programs for this, and yet all these jurisdictions across the country are like focused on the infrastructure issue of like, how do we put more units in the ground? And nobody's really thinking about, wait a second, like, how are we going to make sure that we have a workforce to be able to service all of these stations? And the reality is we're talking to people like, you don't necessarily need a college degree. You need to be super detail oriented. You need to learn how, to fix certain things. But they're like, if you have a high school degree, if you're like, detail oriented, you're competent, you go through the training program, you can get one of these jobs and, within a couple of years be making six figures, right? So the world, like I said, is just a changing place. And I think, less and less, and you're seeing this with college enrollment rates as well, right? People are beginning to realize, wait a second, is it work? Does this make sense? Yeah.
You're so right. I laugh because I didn't finish my degree. And what's funny is, so a gentleman on my team has his PhD. He was working on his PhD. And he was like, he was going to go to finish his PhD. He's made the investment. And he knows he's taken some time. And I was like, you're so smart. And he goes, am I though? He was like, look, I have to stop working. I'm going to be making less. I'm going to have to pay back more so I can get this PhD, or I can work through and earn the same and not do my, he was like, right now I'm not feeling really smart. And it's interesting because he was kind of like, it was his first job in the corporate from the education space, which again is difficult for some people to take, and realizing like understanding how business works versus how education works. And it's so competitive in the education space. And but there was no way at the time to get a degree in diversity program management, was not a career path. And looking at all of those things, I think it's really interesting. I think it's also true. I used to be a writer, and when I was asked to become a writer, I was like, I don't know how to write. And when I first wrote one, they like, this looks like a paper. Like, we're not looking for a paper. We just want to know what Jackye thinks. And I was like, really? Okay, I'll tell you. And I think that you're right with the content creators and the way people are doing things. There's no way that anybody would have been able to do that. Wasn't a marketing degree. That wasn't a communications degree. There are so many new roles. I have a friend, his son is going for his master's program, but he already makes a living as a gamer. He's a professional gamer. He's going to school to get it and has his own place, and his parents are just falling out. They just don't know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And so many managers or HR folks, when you actually talk to them, even when somebody either has a degree or has the 2 to 4 years of experience, when they come into a new organization, like, they're not 100% effective from day one anyways, right? There's sort of this learning curve. And so when you take into account that even somebody who's experienced or who is degreed has an onboarding time period where they actually have to learn, well, how do they operate in this particular company, right? You begin to see like, well, then having an apprentice who's never done this before, it might not be a huge leap, right? That and like what we have going on right now.
I think it's also interesting, like, I get so excited when I feel like I learned something. And I have my oldest graduated with a math degree, and my son's 20, he's in college. And I'll be like, I found out this thing. And they were like, okay, if you would have gone to college, you would have learned that. And I was like, and I wouldn't have used it until 5 minutes ago, and I would have forgotten it. And it wouldn't have been the same software. I mean, I took keyboarding in college, not to date myself, but I took keyboarding. I didn't take a window. There was no such thing as that when I was in college. We had to learn that stuff later.
I mean, that's the thing, right? Especially with technology jobs, things are changing all the time. So people who got a computer science degree, even just like 5 or 6 years ago, with all the new sort of software that's out, how people are coding and programming today versus how that was happening 7 or 8 years ago, it's like very different, right? So you need a way to ensure that people are gaining new skills, whether that's through upskilling, whether that's through apprenticeships, right? That is nimble and flexible and can change like on the dime as time goes on. And that's part of the reason why we felt like a software platform was the right way to do this, because that way, like, something changes, we can update a course and then it's updated for everyone all across the country.
Well, I have another question, kind of going in a different direction, but I'm wondering, what has been the biggest shift since you've kind of made a transition, right? You went from education, from that space, to founder of a SaaS company. What has been the biggest thing that you've learned going through that process?
It's been fascinating. And like, but in a great and fun way. I'd say like the biggest thing to me, like, I used to raise money in the nonprofit space. And the sort of basic tenets of fundraising in the nonprofit and education world was raise as much money as you can and spend it as slowly as you can. And in like the startup space, it's almost exactly the opposite. Raise as little as you can get away with so that you don't have to give away a lot of equity in your company, but spend it fast and like show traction, right? And so that leap has been, different for me, but it's been incredibly fun. And my co-founder, Jimena, even though we actually used to work together in education, she started a tech company right before this one. And so she went through all of the ups and downs of that experience. And so I think has come into this one with me, like with such clarity on like, all right, these are the mistakes that I made before. We're not going to do this again, right? So one of the things she told me early on the fundraising side, she's like, one of the things that I learned with my first company is not all money is good money.
Yep.
She was like, we had investors that, they just ended up being more of a pain.
Yeah.
She's like, so I want for our, for BuildWithin to be like really choosy about who we take money from and only be in business with people that we want to spend time with, that we believe in us. And like, this is a journey that's hard enough as it is. You got to do it with people that you like. So those are some of the lessons I think that she has brought from her previous startup that really have helped us be clear about how we're approaching this one.
Yes. I mean, it is a big risk. I worked in the startup space for a long time, and I explain to people when they are like, why would you go to another startup? I'm always like, it's like haunted house fun for me. It's a little scary. It's a little edgy. Not really sure what's behind the corner, but when I get there, I'm like, oh, I think we can do this. I think we can do this. And it's exciting. So it's my version of a haunted house. Real haunted houses are really scary for me, but it's like my version. But also, I noticed that you taught in Baltimore. My family's from Baltimore, and you live in LA, and culturally, you just couldn't get more different than LA and Baltimore. How was that? Like, where do you get good crab cakes, and what has that transition been like?
That's right. I started my career in Baltimore, Maryland at Harlem Park Elementary School, the place to be. I mean, I still have a fondness for that city. In fact, I was in Maryland the other day and presenting in front of like some workforce boards. And I was like, my career started here in Maryland. And then, you've got LA where, my goodness, I love LA. I love living here. It's an amazing city, but like, it's so diverse here. Like I can go, it's funny. I just moved my parents here.
Oh, wow.
Koreatown. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever. We never have to speak English. Like our dog groomer, our pharmacist, our dry cleaner, our grocer, they're all Korean. And like, we never have to speak English again. So hallelujah.
Yeah.
So, and my husband and I, in addition to this, we also have soul food restaurants. So we opened our soul food restaurant called Fixin' Soul Kitchen, opened the first one in Sacramento, California, 6 months before the pandemic started. We opened our second one here in LA. Our third one just opened 2 weeks ago in Tulsa, Oklahoma on Black Wall Street.
Ooh.
Yes. And so that is like fascinating work as well. And we actually have some apprentices who work for us in the restaurant business. But it just goes to show you that like the apprenticeship model can we started with like tech and tech adjacent jobs, but now we're moving into like insurance sales and restaurant management. And we just think the possibilities are endless on that front. But one of our apprentices, it lives in DC, but she works for this company, so she works virtually for us, right? And it was interesting because she was on a panel the other day, and one of the people asked her a question, and it goes back to something that you said earlier. They said, so if you were trying to tell a new employer, like, why should you hire an apprentice? What would you say? And she said, she thought about it. And she was like, I would say, like, when you hire an apprentice, you have the opportunity to like mold this person into exactly what works for your company. Like, we don't come with bad habits from like a prior job of like, oh, we have to do it this way or that. Like, you tell us. Like, what is the culture? What are the expectations of your company? And that apprentice is going to be oriented solely to that. And she said that, and I was like, that is so right. Like I hadn't thought about it before. And that's exactly like how she has come into our company. Like she had studied to go into healthcare for graduated from Howard, did it for 3 months. It was like, this is not it for me.
Right, right.
It's like been creative and wanted to do something along those lines. And so we had a position for a digital marketing and social media associate, right? Apprentice. And so she came into the role. She's able to use like all of her creative juices in DC, but working for a company in LA. And she gets to travel like to all the different restaurant sites. She's like a little bit learning the restaurant business, but really is more like, able to flex those muscles. And it's interesting because on that same panel, someone asked her, they were like, what was like the biggest surprise to you about being an apprentice? She's like, I didn't know what being an apprentice was. She's like, I thought I was like being an intern. I thought I was going to be running around, getting coffee, making copies. She's like, being an apprentice is no joke. Like I am in this job every day. People expect me to like do certain things. She's like, now I have support. I have the platform. I can learn. I have places to go. She's like, but like this really is like learning on the job. It's not watching somebody do it. It is like you are learning and doing at the same time. And so that's like also one of the things that I think goes back to what you were saying earlier is like, people just, you don't know ahead of time, like when you're going to get that degree, like, do I really see myself in that job in the long term? Right. And so I think more and more people are going to want to be in this place where they see a job, they're like, all right, how can I get into that job? 5 years later, they might be in something else, right? And so we have to develop training programs for people in new jobs and new industries that are much more nimble, right? Right, for people to be able to switch from this to that. Because I think that's just going to be the wave of the future.
I think you're right. And to ask, I always thought this was really funny. Anytime I would go take a class, I wanted to audit a class or just take 1 or 2 classes at community college or a sit. And you always get the advisor on the phone, right? And they're like, oh, well, why did you leave? And I'm like, at the time, I was like, really? I'm 40. Like, you want to know why I left like 22 years ago? I was like, I wanted to party. I didn't, my 8 o'clock class was too early. Like, what is it relevant to now? And then I was like, wait, do I want to go back? I'm going to have to learn all of these things. And I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. And then I'm going to get it. And it's outdated or it's not relevant or something new came up. And I think people are moving faster to success. They're trying to move faster. And I think the whole world is moving faster these days with the technologies that we're seeing.
And the other thing is, like, I think that we are so penned in sometimes to kind of like certain ideas about what it means to be in a particular job or even a particular industry, right? So we are talking to folks, for example, in the hospitality industry, and they were saying to us, like, we have realized that we have people who work in certain jobs at our properties and in a hotel, and they think, oh, I'm a front desk attendant, right? And if I don't want to do this forever, then I have to go somewhere else and, go back to school, et cetera. And they're like, but these folks don't realize that you want to go into like food and beverage. Like, we have an opportunity for that. You want to go into marketing and sales. We have opportunities there. You want to do tech, finance, like within the hospitality industry, there are so many jobs that are actually available. And what they're saying to us is like, people don't understand that. They don't have the visibility, right? And they don't necessarily understand, like, there is career mobility, like, opportunity within that. And then what they're trying to figure out right now is, all right, how can we use the apprenticeship model to like move somebody? Like, I'm a front desk attendant right now, and I want to move into digital marketing and social media for the same company, right? How do I gain the skills to be able to do that? Like, that is like a perfect match for, an apprenticeship or upskilling like that.
And it's rare. There's a gentleman I work with. He started as customer success. Then he moved to recruiting. And now he's in human resources at the same company. But he's got such vast knowledge about our company, the internal culture, what our product, all of these things that we couldn't dream of teaching and being able to move internally. And why lose top talent if you're able to help throughout these different roles? Has anyone used it? Does BuildWithin do anything with like internal talent mobility or people who are doing those things? Because so many people, they love their boss or they love the company and they love the company culture.
Yeah.
Especially if you're lucky enough to have found an inclusive culture and then have to go back out there where you never know what you're going to get.
So when we started the company, we were really focused on the apprenticeship model, but more recently, what we've realized is that employers really they like the apprenticeship model for either bringing in new people, but now they're beginning to realize, wait a second, we could use this for upskilling, right? And that's sort of opened a new world for us, because what we're realizing is, employers, if we as BuildWithin through our platform can help employers to realize there is a way to set things up so that your employees can learn about the job possibilities internally, but in different departments, what skills they might have that they could leverage for certain jobs, right? So that's where them doing the assessments will be helpful, that sort of thing. So absolutely, there's significant potential for us to work with employers more broadly on how do you think about your talent sort of writ large, right? Because for a lot of employers that we talk to, they're like, well, we have certain jobs that we're actually phasing out, right? Through technology and other things. So we're going to have people who are in those roles right now who won't be in them a year from now, but they're great, loyal folks. So, how can we upskill them or reskill them to match some of the jobs where in other departments that are really growing aggressively? And so being able to kind of utilize a platform to set employers up for success where they can help to guide people internally through those processes is, I think, going to become increasingly important.
Yes. And I mean, I can feel it. And I hope people who are listening, now's the time to do the assessment and the gap. Even if you're not hiring today for a full-time position, having a better understanding and audit of those skills and being able to increase your diversity internally when you're looking for various people. And I mean, what you were talking about when you were saying, oh, people of color or older people or all of these different skills, now's the time when it's okay, you have this model, you have to figure out where the gap is, get started now, because this happens every year. Every time this happens, Michelle, all of a sudden, one person will say, oh, we're hiring 2,000 people this year. And then it just goes, ape. All these people, the faucet turns on and people aren't ready to compete. So they overpay, they don't look at the right skills, are making really these fast decisions without understanding the talent that they need and building on that talent. And I always say now's the time to invest, double down on DEIB initiatives. It's the time to double down on looking at what skills and looking at those gaps before it turns back on and gets away from you. Because so many, but they never listen to me, right? Every time they want to build, they talk to talent acquisition and DEIB. When they want to cut, they talk to finance, and they're like, oh, well, we need to cut this amount. But we don't need to cut skills, right? We don't need to cut those things. Those things we need to build.
That's right. And you don't necessarily have to build skills. You don't necessarily have to say to somebody, okay, we are going to guarantee you that you will be moving into this position, on date certain, right? Because folks also they want to be involved in professional development. They want to be improving themselves. They want to be gaining additional skills, and to know oh, I could do that in this realm. If I gain certain skills in this area, I could go this direction or that direction, right? You're going to increase your employee loyalty, their engagement, right? By, to your point, thinking a little bit ahead and not just when you got to press the gas pedal. But if you're doing stuff now, knowing that, a year from now, 18 months from now, we might just be like hiring massively again. But if you're sort of laying the groundwork now, you might have internal folks that you can move into those roles because you've invested now in making sure that they're being professionally developed.
That's the part. I mean, it's like the biggest frustration for, I think, a lot of DEIB practitioners in trying to explain these things. I think people are slowly starting to get it and understand. But I also like the second chance aspect of BuildWithin. It's a great opportunity because there has been a push. We know that there's been a push to end the over requirements. We know that there's been a push for getting people the second chance, but we also know how bias works and how we got here, right? It has to do with fear, it has to do with transferring power. Oh, somebody's taking my job away from me, or what if something goes wrong? So I'm just going to go do it the way that I've always done it. I'm wondering, how has it worked with people who maybe they were previously incarcerated, or people that maybe they've never had a job and now they're looking for a job now that all their kids are back in school and they're like, never had a job and I'm, 45 years old. What can I do? How is it working in those two? I know those are two vastly separate worlds, but I'd love to hear how that is working.
Yeah, so I think about goes to what you said, which is like people tend to be stuck in this old paradigm of this is what we need in someone. This is how we're going to assess whether someone has, what we want. So just a quick example, we were working with a company that told us they had vacancies and wanted to hire. We were sending that company, kind of traditional resumes. And they're looking at them, no. And what we realized was like the traditional resumes were not doing a good job of sort of highlighting what we felt like these candidates could bring to the table. And so we moved to a completely different skills and competency-based profile, right? So not like, was there any gaps in your employment? Where were you before? But like, here is what I know and am able to do. And when we reframed it that way, the employer was looking at a piece of paper, was like, okay, they know how to do that. They can do that. They learned that. Like, that's what I need for this job, right? They really sort of opened their shutters to a whole new pool of folks. And so I think that moving away from like the traditional like resume type into skills and competency based kind of hiring practices really does help those like sort of more non-traditional candidates, right? It helps them and it helps take the bias out of so many processes that are kind of inherent in like the old school models.
I always tell people, if you're hiring the same way you were hired, it's probably time to make a change. Like, it's like, why are we like passing on the trauma? Why are we doing it? It's like, oh, well, I had to do it. You had to do it. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to do it in that way. And we have a rare opportunity right now as we're seeing new roles that we haven't seen before. Again, new technology and a new talent pool. I think we always say the before times when we're talking about COVID, but there's a lot of people that had the chance to slow down enough to see what they wanted or what they didn't want, or a change that they wanted to make. And a lot of people are moving into that space. And I'm seeing a lot of teachers transitioning and using some of the skills that they're having, especially as we're seeing different things that come down, like different rules or different places where they're having different scenarios of trying to make those changes and not recognizing how many skills people are using. And I think about that a lot.
Well, like the transferable skills piece is big, right? So taking your educator example, not that I'm trying to take any teachers out of the classroom.
Absolutely not. My son wants to be a teacher, so we have another one.
We need teachers to stay in the classroom. However, for folks who have made that decision, like that they want to go into something else, what we've found, for example, is that teachers make great customer success managers, because you need to have a lot of patience, right? You are dealing with like multiple people with like very different personalities. And oftentimes you have to bring them around to something. You have to teach them like, oh, here is how you can best utilize our software, our product, et cetera. So the transferable skills from being an educator into being a customer success manager, like those are really clear, right? And you can draw so many parallels like that. And that's part of what, we're working on, is showing people what the potential is. Like people sometimes like themselves are like, oh, I can't do that because I don't have this and I don't have that. And what we're trying to show people is, no, you can, and there's a route through which you can do that. Like the world is your oyster, literally. And don't be the one that's shutting yourself off from these opportunities. Because there are routes into both gaining the skills that you need and then also actually being able to be employed in these roles.
Yes, I think that's funny. You're right. It's so, because you don't have much of a choice. I laugh. I have a friend, she's a kindergarten teacher. And one time I was like, hey, do you want to go out for cocktails? And she was like, I can't go out for cocktails because I'm teaching science. And I was like, yeah, but you teach kindergarten. And she was like, have you ever tried to teach a 5-year-old about the sun and the moon? And I was like, no, how do you do that? She's like, exactly. Like, have you ever tried to explain that, we're floating, but we're not floating? Like, have you ever tried to explain what happens? And I was cracking up and I was like, oh, that's just one little thing of trying to figure out. And you're right. So many customers are like, you have to explain it lots of different ways and then pivot and try to do all of those different pieces.
I think people really underestimate, like servers are another like group, right? So you serve in a restaurant, you have to have like situational awareness. You have to problem solve through so many things. And so, if you're a server, certainly there's like a trajectory that you can go through in, the restaurant industry, but you've got some transferable skills that you could literally use to go into so many different career tracks as well. And so like opening that possibility and showing people what that could look like is sort of one of our passions at BuildWithin.
I love that. Well, you've always been out front. You've always had those pieces, but you're also a founder of a company. And I know that there's a lot of our audience that are like, as a woman founder of a software company, is there anything that you wish you would have known a couple of years ago prior to getting involved, or any surprises that you've learned since you've gotten into this kind of world?
I think that my journey has been so facilitated by my co-founder, Jimena, because she went through this before. And I think for us, that's why we always want to be as helpful as we can to other female founders, other founders of color. Both of us are people of color, just because like the deck is stacked against us, right? I mean, if you look at any of the statistics around, the percentage of venture dollars that go to women founders, founders of color, it's like staggeringly low. And the fact that she founded her prior company, had a wildly successful exit from that, you would expect that people literally would be throwing money at her, right? And a lot of our partners are like, oh my gosh, like why isn't everybody just like opening their checkbook to him in it? And she's like, I feel like if I was a 40-year-old white tech bro, that would probably be happening, right? But the reality is, she'll tell you, she's like, I have an accent, I'm super intense, I do not like look the part. And because of that, people are, a little, like, I don't know if skeptical is the right word. It's just not, it's not as obvious. And for that reason, like that has been kind of somewhat surprising and disappointing to me, is like knowing that all of those biases like still exist. And there's very much an environment where people kind of look at us as two female founders of color and are, despite the fact that we both have like track records of success,
Right.
still a lot of skepticism around that. That has been, a little disappointing and surprising to me, but I think it makes us hungrier to like just
Yes.
prove ourselves and knock this out of the park with BuildWithin, and then to be able to hopefully like open doors for other people along the way.
I love that. My at Textio, our co-founders are partners. They are married, and she was talking about everyone was looking to her husband anytime, even though he was the CTO, she's the CEO. They would always face her, and eventually he started sitting next to the person, the VC person or whoever they were meeting with. He would sit next to them, so they would have to look at her, or they'd have to twist their body around to look at him, and it would make it incredibly awkward so that they would have those conversations. I was like, oh, that's a good one. But it's like, it's sad that you would still have to do that, but one day we're getting closer.
One day. And we'll be on call. Like our staff, our team is super diverse. And so we'll get comments all the time. Like we'll be doing a demo or something like that, and people will be like, oh my gosh, I've never been on a investor call or a tech demo with like so many people of color on the Zoom call, right? And in this day and age, like it's sort of surprising, but also it's like, all right, well, this is why, and that's why for us, like the apprenticeships are so important, because giving a diverse group of candidates like avenues in to be able to be at the table, to be able to be on these calls. I mean, we have we drink our own Kool-Aid, so we hire apprentices, we have them on our team. Like every day they're out there like knocking it out and making us proud. And we're like, this is what is possible. Like when you give people the opportunity and you set the expectations and you give them the support that they need, like there is no end to what they can do.
No. And I love that we had a dinner. We were all out at dinner, and there's two men that are on the executive team, but they weren't with us. So it was all women sitting, eating dinner. And I was like, no one thinks that this is the executive team of a software company right now. No one in this restaurant is thinking that, and it's like, we're getting closer, and it was amazing. And it's always, it's an honor, it's a privilege to do that. But I love the support and the opportunities. You're right. So, well, I know we're getting close to time. So I do want to ask if you have one thing that you want our listeners to take away from what they've heard today, what would that be?
There's one thing I would probably say is our company motto. So our company motto is potential over credential. Like living in a different world, the days of like what we call the paper ceiling, right? Where you have to have this degree or that credential, like is over. And we have to start focusing more on like, what is the potential that people have? And then like, what are the resources and supports that we can put in place to help them meet that potential? And when we do that, like as a company, we believe that we can be living in a world where there are zero vacancies, right? Where employers aren't clamoring every day. But in order to get there, there's got to be a complete sort of paradigm shift. So potential over credential.
I love that. And if I had one thing to say, and I laugh that Katie's not here because she always steals mine when I say mine. But if I had one that I would say, I think it's really what you got to at the end of giving people the opportunity. Like you literally can change the world. And also, I think it's so interesting. I want to give you your flowers too for going and making that pivot and giving people opportunities that they may not have had. I think that's great in giving and setting an example and setting that path of having more women founders and women of color to be able to do that. I think is great and cool. And I also need to throw in there, if you feel like opening a soul food restaurant in Waco, we're not that far from Oklahoma.
Let me just tell you that Kevin Johnson right now is on the hunt. He is trying to open 50 fixins across the country. And so Texas is on his radar. So if you want to. I'm
sure Chip and Joanna would love to meet you all. I think y'all would be best friends.
Yes, because Joanna also, she's half Korean. I have some half Korean kids. Like we could all.
That's right. Well, thank you, Michelle, for joining me. I am Jackye Clayton, and you've been listening to the Inclusive AF podcast. And thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.